The animal sleeping in your house right now is the result of an accident nobody noticed while it was happening. Nobody bred it, nobody planned it. For tens of thousands of years, there was no such thing as a dog, only wolves and humans, and a fire that one of them got a little too comfortable sitting near. By the time anyone realized something had changed, it had already changed completely. To understand how strange this is, you have to understand how every other domesticated animal came to exist. Sheep, cattle, horses, chickens, all of them follow roughly the same story. Humans captured wild animals, kept them in captivity, and over generations selected for traits they wanted. Calmer temperament, more meat, more wool, more eggs. It was slow, but it was directed. Someone at every stage was choosing. The dog doesn't fit this story. And for a long time, scientists tried to force it to fit anyway. The traditional theory went like this. Early humans found wolf pups, raised them by hand, and gradually tamed them over generations until they became dogs. It's a tidy explanation. It's also almost certainly wrong for a simple reason. Adult wolves raised from birth by humans, even today, with all of modern science behind the effort, do not become dogs. They remain wolves. Friendlier wolves sometimes, but wolves. The behavioral gap between a wolf and a dog isn't something you can train your way across in one generation or several. Something else had to be happening. In the 1950s, a Russian geneticist named Dmitri Belyaev started a different kind of experiment. Not with wolves, but with foxes on a fur farm. He wanted to understand how domestication actually worked at a genetic level, so he took a population of foxes and did something simple. In each generation, he bred only the individuals that showed the least fear of humans. Nothing else. Not size, not coat color, not usefulness, just tameness. Within a few generations, something unexpected started happening. The foxes weren't just calmer. Their ears started flopping, their tails curled, their faces became rounder, more juvenile looking. Some developed patches of white fur. None of these traits were selected for directly. Belyaev had only been breeding for tameness, and an entire suite of physical changes came along for free. This is now called domestication syndrome, and it shows up across nearly every domesticated species in some form. The traits all cluster together: floppy ears, shorter snouts, curled tails, patches of unusual coloring, smaller brains relative to body size, and an extended juvenile period where animals stay playful and dependent longer than their wild ancestors. Select for tameness, and these traits tend to follow because they're all connected to the same underlying biological systems, particularly ones involving stress hormones and the timing of development. Now, go back to that wolf at the edge of the camp. Around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, human settlements started producing something that had never existed before in large quantities: garbage, specifically food waste, bones, scraps, discarded carcasses, concentrated in one place repeatedly for as long as a camp was occupied. To a wolf, this was an enormous, low-effort calorie source, but approaching it meant getting close to humans, fire, and other wolves that hadn't yet earned a different name. Most wolves wouldn't risk it. The ones that could tolerate the stress of being near humans, wolves with naturally lower fear responses, probably due to existing variation in their stress hormone systems, could access this food source without the same level of danger. Over generations, those slightly less fearful wolves had an advantage. They ate more reliably. They may have raised more pups successfully as a result. Nobody was selecting them. Nobody was choosing. The wolves were selecting themselves generation after generation based on a single trait: how much stress they experienced near humans. And because of domestication syndrome, that single trait, reduced fear response, dragged along everything else. The floppy ears, the shorter snouts, the patches of color, the permanently juvenile behavior, including something wolves rarely do as adults: play, beg, and seek attention from another species. This is the part that should sound familiar, because it's exactly what a dog does. A wolf is independent, wary, and largely indifferent to humans except as a threat or a resource. A dog looks at a human's face repeatedly for information, something wolves essentially never do, even hand-raised ones. Dogs make a specific facial expression, raising their inner eyebrows to create a sad, appealing look, using a muscle that barely exists in wolves at all. This expression appears to have evolved specifically because it makes humans respond to it. It's not a coincidence that it looks like an emotion we recognize. It was selected, unconsciously, by every human who ever found it irresistible and responded by feeding, sheltering, or simply not killing the animal making it. So the timeline looks something like this. Wolves with lower fear responses started scavenging near camps. The least fearful of those wolves did slightly better, generation after generation. Domestication syndrome dragged physical and behavioral changes along with the fear reduction, including changes that made these animals look and act more appealing to humans. Humans, in turn, responded to those traits, tolerating these wolves more, occasionally feeding them, occasionally keeping pups, which gave the friendliest, most juvenile-acting wolves an even bigger advantage. Two species shaped each other in real time with neither one in control of the process. By the time anything resembling deliberate breeding started, and there's evidence this happened much later with humans actively selecting dogs for specific jobs like herding or guarding, the foundational transformation was already done. Humans inherited an animal that had already, in a sense, domesticated itself and then started shaping it further on top of that. Cats followed an almost identical path, thousands of years later, and the comparison is useful because of how differently it ended. When humans started storing surplus grain, which meant settlements, which meant agriculture, they accidentally created something new, a concentrated population of rodents drawn to the grain stores, and rodents attracted wild cats. The same basic pattern repeats. The cats willing to tolerate proximity to humans got access to an easy food source. Over generations, the population shifted toward tamer individuals. But here's where the story diverges. Cats never needed humans to like them back. A cat that tolerated humans enough to hunt near a grain store didn't need to be cute or responsive or eager to make eye contact. It just needed to not run away. So domestication syndrome happened to cats too, but only partially. Slightly smaller brains, some coat variation, but almost none of the behavioral package. Cats never developed the eyebrow muscles dogs use to mimic human emotion. Cats never evolved to track human faces for information the way dogs do. The relationship stayed transactional on the cat side for much longer because it could. The difference wasn't intelligence or some inherent trait of dogginess versus cattiness. The difference was what kind of relationship the original ecological accident demanded. Wolves needed to get close to dangerous, social animals living in groups, which made tolerance of and eventually engagement with humans valuable. Cats needed to get close to rodents, and humans were just incidentally nearby. Two animals ran the same accidental experiment. Only one of them needed to fall in love with us to win it. And the changes in dogs didn't stop at behavior or facial muscles. Genetic studies have identified a specific gene called AMY2B that controls an enzyme used to digest starch. Wolves typically carry very few copies of this gene. Their diet, as predators, contains almost no starch. Dogs carry many more copies. This expansion appears to have happened early, and it spread quickly, because dogs living near humans were eating human food waste. Waste that, once humans started farming, was suddenly full of grain. A wolf's gut couldn't handle that shift. A dog's gut, quietly and without anyone planning it, already had. There's a strange kind of symmetry in all of this. Humans, around the same time, were also living in larger, denser groups than almost any primate before them. And tolerating that density required, among other things, a reduction in aggression and fear responses towards strangers. Some researchers have pointed out that humans show several features of domestication syndrome too, including some of the same facial changes, the same extended period of juvenile dependency, even some of the same hormonal signatures. We may have been running a version of the same unconscious process on ourselves at roughly the same time, which means the story of the dog isn't really a story about one species being shaped by another. It's a story about what happens when two species start living close enough, for long enough, that survival starts depending on the other one's comfort. Neither side designed it. Neither side could have. It happened the way most of the deepest things in biology happen, slowly, invisibly, and only obvious after tens of thousands of years have already passed. The dog asleep in your house right now carries all of it. The floppy ears that came along for free. The gut quietly rebuilt to handle a diet no wolf could survive on. The face shaped over thousands of generations to be unbearably easy to love. The eyebrows that move in a way no wolves ever will evolved for the sole purpose of making a human look back. None of it was the plan. There was no plan. There was only a fire and some scraps and a few wolves who were willing to get a little closer than the others. And 40,000 years later, here you both are.